I'd like to tell you about a conference that I attended last weekend. It was a really good one. It was a gathering of some 40 leaders in the progressive Christian movement and seminarians from around the country. And we gathered right here in Minnesota at a retreat center on the St. Croix River, just a little bit north of Stillwater. And this was a beautiful piece of land along the river there. And I got to the conference center a little bit before the conference was scheduled to start, so I stowed my bag in my room and I hit one of the wilderness trails on the property because I love to walk in the woods, even in the fall when all the leaves are off the trees. And this was a beautiful day. It was about 50 degrees, the sky was blue, there was no sound except for some geese honking in the distance and the wind rustling what few leaves still clung to the branches. And I was just breathing in the air and not thinking about anything. And as I walked, I slipped. And I realized that the ground under me had started to get softer and wetter and muddy. And I thought, well, should I turn back? I don't mind at all walking in mud or hiking in mud, but these were the only shoes that I brought with me to the conference, because I pride myself on how light I can pack. And so if these shoes got all wet and muddy, I would be stuck with them the whole 3-day weekend. But I was having a good time, so I just kept going, and I walked, and the path got muddier and wetter and slicker, and I was sliding around, and I started walking along the edge of the path where there were more leaves to kind of make a more solid walk for me, and even that didn't work after a while. It was just slick and muddy, and I was sliding around, and mud caked the bottom of my shoes, and then I got to a point where there was water covering the path for just a long way, so I had to turn around. But at the point where I had stopped to look at the water, my shoes had sunk into the mud a couple of inches, and I thought, oh great. So I pulled one foot out, and I put it on a rock that was a little bit of ways to get my balance. And when I put my foot down, mud and water oozed out the sides. And then I went to pull the other foot out, and I realized that the suction from the mud was holding my foot in place. So I pulled, and pop, my foot came out of my shoe. So there I was standing there in the cold, wet mud, sticky. My sock was all wet. My shoe was this deep into the mud, so I had to get a stick and dig it out and jam my foot back in it and march back to the retreat center, knowing that I was going to be uncomfortable for a few days. At least my foot was. But I'm happy to say that the rest of the conference, it went a lot better than that. And one of the great things about this gathering is that we weren't there to come up with some grand agenda. We weren't there to come up with some highfalutin goals for the progressive Christian movement. We were there to meet one another, to get to know one another, to build relationships, and to kind of fan the flame of hope for the progressive Christian movement, which is just starting to blossom again after a very long winter. And the first order of business we decided is that we needed to come up with a definition of what it meant to be a progressive Christian that 40 of us could agree on. It's hard to get 40 people to agree on anything, and this was no exception. And so the definition we came up with on the whiteboard that we were writing everything on, it was this long, and it had all kinds of points to it. So I'm just going to mention a couple of those right now. And one is that progressive Christians are accepting of all people, race, gender, sexual identity, ethnicity, all of that stuff, but also of people whose paths to God might not look like ours. Progressive Christians embrace science and the natural world, knowing that they can inform our faith. They don't have to threaten our faith. Progressive Christians live in community. Excuse me. It's not about just personal salvation. It's about salvation of the whole earth. And so on. Now, there were 2 points that really resonated for me. The first was that progressive Christians are not merely the opposite of conservative Christians. We're not just a left-wing counterbalance to the Christian right. We are not liberal Christians. Instead, we are a middle way, traversing the space between the more conservative elements on the right and those people on the secular left who don't have a lot of trust in Christianity after seeing some of the things that have happened over the past 30 years. Excuse me. The other point that especially spoke to me was that as progressive Christians, we have found an approach to God through the life and the teachings of Jesus. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Kind of obligatory to be a Christian. Would seem it would be a point that we could just take for granted, that was a given, that when we were trying to identify ourselves as a distinct movement, that we didn't really need to mention that. But this point is so important to the fabric of what it means to be a Christian that we felt the need to write it down, to not take it for granted, to be vocal about it. Because unfortunately, it's felt for a long time like progressive Christians have given up Jesus to others, that he belongs to them and not to us, even though we follow in Jesus' footsteps too. And how do we do that? Well, a good place to start is with the Sermon on the Mount. At this point in his ministry, as it's described in the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus has been baptized. He survived the 40 days in the wilderness. He's chosen a few close disciples. He's taken his ministry around Galilee, healing and teaching. And now he's gathered enough followers that he can really launch his mission. He can really get his message out with his Sermon on the Mount. And the sermon begins with the Beatitudes, which Sandy read to us a few minutes ago. And that's what we're focusing on today. Now, there have been books, or volumes of books, written about the Beatitudes. So we can't possibly cover them in depth all right here. Although we could take one of those Sun Country commercial votes where they ask, who wants a juicy cheeseburger for lunch and who'd like crackers? Who would like a 2-hour sermon? Who'd like to be done in a few minutes? But we'll skip the vote and I'll keep my illusions.